The wind off Lake Erie has a way of making grief feel sharper. It cuts clean through wool coats and polite expressions, through rehearsed condolences and paper programs with glossy photos. On February 3rd, I stood at the edge of my grandmother's grave with my hands shoved into my pockets, trying to feel my fingers, trying to feel anything other than the hollow space under my ribs. The ground was still dark and loose, the kind of earth that hasn't settled yet. The wreaths looked too bright against it. The ribbon on the standing spray still had creases from being unwrapped that morning. Everything felt temporary, fresh, unfinished. Like maybe if we all waited long enough, someone would say there had been a mistake. My father stood a few feet away from me, shoulders squared, jaw tight, checking his watch like he was timing a delivery window. That's what it looked like he was waiting for a package instead of burying his mother. He didn't cry. He didn't touch the casket before they lowered it. He barely looked at it. His coat was buttoned all the way up, collar stiff, polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp grass. If you didn't know better, you might have thought he was at a business meeting he hadn't scheduled. The minister finished speaking. People began drifting away in small clusters, murmuring the usual things. She lived a good life. She was at peace. Call if you need anything. My stepmother, Celeste, leaned into my father and whispered something about traffic getting worse after 3. My brother Evan was already halfway turned toward the parking lot, scrolling through his phone like the cemetery had Wi-Fi strong enough to justify it. I stayed where I was. I didn't want to leave her there alone, even though I knew how irrational that was. I just needed one more minute. That's when the funeral director stepped toward me and handed me a small envelope. "Your grandmother left instructions," he said gently. "This was to go directly to you." My name was written on it in her careful looping handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the same script she used on birthday cards and grocery lists. Inside was an old deposit book, cloth-covered, edges softened with age, stamped with the name Lakeshore Savings and dated 1971. It felt warm in my hands despite the cold air, like it had been waiting. I barely had time to process it before my father reached over and took it from me. He flipped it open quickly, scanning the pages with a frown, like he was looking for a typo. The last entry was from 1992, a balance just over $90,000. He let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that isn't humor so much as dismissal. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for Celeste and Evan to hear. "Her little book from the Stone Age. That bank probably doesn't even exist anymore." Before I could react, he tossed it onto the fresh mound of dirt. The book landed face down, half buried in loose soil. He looked at it the way someone looks at a receipt they don't need and said, evenly, almost bored, "It's pointless. Let it rot here." And then he turned and walked away. I didn't follow him. I stood there long enough to hear the car doors slam in the parking lot, long enough to see the last of the guests disappear past the row of bare maple trees lining the cemetery drive. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and cold stone. The grave looked smaller now without the crowd around it. Smaller but heavier somehow, like something unfinished was sitting on top of it. The deposit book lay half buried in the dirt where my father had thrown it. A corner of the cloth cover was already darkened by moisture. For a moment, I just stared at it. Not because of the money. I honestly assumed it meant nothing. The bank name was ancient. The last entry was older than I was. But my grandmother had made sure it was handed directly to me. Not to my father. Not to the family. To me. That mattered. I walked back across the grass and knelt down, ignoring the cold soaking through my tights. I brushed dirt from the cover carefully, the way she used to brush crumbs from her kitchen table with the side of her hand. The book felt softer than it looked, worn smooth from decades of handling. 53 years of deposits, withdrawals, updates, waiting in desk drawers and coat pockets, and maybe tucked inside her purse next to peppermint gum. I held it for a second before opening it again. The ink entries were neat and consistent. Small amounts at first, $25, $40, $60, each recorded in the same steady handwriting. No dramatic jumps, no flashy transactions, just discipline, just time. The final balance from 1992 sat there quietly, unassuming, as if it had no idea my father had just declared it worthless. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I felt something harder. Something steadier. A quiet refusal to let that book stay in the ground just because someone else decided it didn't matter. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the deposit book in front of me. My apartment radiator clanked in irregular bursts, like it was arguing with the cold outside. The overhead light hummed faintly. I hadn't even taken my coat off yet. I just sat there staring at the cloth cover like it might speak. Grandma Dorothy had never been dramatic. She didn't do grand gestures. She didn't drop hints about hidden fortunes or make cryptic comments about one day you'll see. She clipped coupons. She reused aluminum foil. She kept a jar of mismatched buttons in case something needed fixing. If this book had been important, she would have said so directly. Unless she couldn't. I ran my thumb along the inside cover and noticed the back flap was slightly thicker than it should have been. Not obvious, just layered. Carefully, I slid my finger into the seam. There was resistance, then the faint sound of paper separating. I unfolded a small yellowed note tucked inside. My name was written at the top in her handwriting. Only Mara. My chest tightened. The book is the doorway. Use the number inside. You'll know who you can trust. Underneath that, written separately, Acts 1 and 4, 49772. I read it once, twice, 3 times. The book is the doorway. My grandmother had never used dramatic language in her life. If she called something a doorway, she meant it. Suddenly, the deposit book didn't feel like an old relic my father could toss aside. It felt like a test. And for the first time since the funeral, my grief shifted into something else. Curiosity. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 2 things: the deposit book hitting the dirt and my grandmother's handwriting on that folded note. The book is the doorway. It didn't sound like her. It sounded almost strategic, deliberate, like she'd known something I didn't. By 2:17 a.m., I was sitting cross-legged on my couch with my laptop open, typing Lakeshore Savings Ohio merger history into the search bar. Lakeshore Savings had merged in 2004, then merged again in 2011, then been absorbed by Great Lakes Community Credit Union in 2018. Corporate consolidation is a quiet kind of erasure. Names disappear, signage changes, websites redirect, but records don't just evaporate. They get archived, transferred, stored somewhere in systems no one under 30 knows how to navigate. If the book was a doorway, that account number was the key. By the time my alarm went off at 6:30, I'd mapped out a timeline of bank mergers like I was building a conspiracy board. I showered, dressed, and called into work with a vague family matter explanation that my supervisor didn't question. Grief is convenient that way. No one pushes when you say the word funeral. At 9:10 a.m., I walked into Great Lakes Community Credit Union downtown with the deposit book in my bag and a folder of documents tucked under my arm like I was preparing for cross-examination. The lobby was quiet, clean, modern. Nothing about it suggested it held secrets older than I was. A young teller named Noah greeted me with professional brightness. When I placed the deposit book on the counter, his expression shifted from friendly to confused. "Wow," he said softly. "I haven't seen one of these before." "I was told this bank acquired Lakeshore Savings," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to check on an account." He typed in the number from the note, paused, frowned, typed again, slower this time. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "There's nothing in our active system under that number. It's probably been closed for decades." "Probably." The word landed heavier than I expected. I nodded, thanked him, and gathered my folder. I'd prepared myself for this outcome. Of course the account was gone. Of course my father had been right. Old banks don't preserve small accounts from the 80s. They liquidate, they consolidate, they forget. I had made it almost to the glass doors when I heard someone behind me say, "Miss?" I turned. An older woman stood near one of the offices lining the back wall. Short gray hair, sharp posture, glasses resting low on her nose. Her nameplate read, V. Hartwell, Operations Manager. She gestured toward the book in my hands. "May I take a look at that?" Something in her tone wasn't casual curiosity. It was recognition. I handed it to her carefully. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages with more attention than the teller had. When she reached the back cover, her eyes lingered. Then she looked up at me, not surprised exactly, but alert. "This account format," she said quietly, "was often used as a linked ledger." "I don't understand," I admitted. She closed the book and motioned toward her office. Come with me. Inside, she shut the door and logged into a different system than the teller had used. The keyboard clicks were deliberate, measured. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence stretched. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. This number, she said carefully, doesn't connect to a standard savings account. My pulse quickened. It connects to a trust structure. My mouth went dry. A trust? I repeated. She turned her monitor slightly away from me, then printed something instead. The printer hummed softly, feeding out a single sheet of paper. She covered it with her hand before sliding it across the desk. I need to confirm your identity before I explain further, she said, her voice more serious now. But I can tell you this much. She paused. This deposit book wasn't meant to show you the money. She met my eyes. It was meant to hide it. My heart started pounding so loudly, I was sure she could hear it across the desk. Hide it, I repeated, barely above a whisper. Miss Hartwell folded her hands carefully over the printed page, as if even the air in the room needed to be handled correctly. Your grandmother didn't just open a savings account, she said. She opened a trust. The passbook you brought in was structured as a linked ledger, essentially a surface account. The real assets were held separately. The word assets didn't feel real. It sounded like something that belonged in boardrooms and estate planning brochures, not in the life of a woman who reused tea bags. She verified my ID, my birth certificate, the death certificate. She typed again, slowly, precisely. I watched her face more than the screen, the slight tightening around her eyes, the careful way she inhaled before speaking again. Miss Quinn, she said at last, turning the paper toward me, I need you to remain calm. I looked down, and my brain refused to process what it saw. A line of numbers, clean and official. 2,784,142 cents. The decimal felt obscene. That's not possible, I said automatically. She worked in a factory. She clipped coupons. Yes, Miss Hartwell replied gently, and she invested consistently since the early 1970s. Contributions were modest but regular. Dividends were reinvested. No withdrawals. Decades of compound growth. Decades. I imagined my grandmother at her small kitchen table, writing checks for $30, $40, skipping something small so she could tuck money somewhere no one else could see. I imagined her doing that year after year while my father described her as comfortable but never successful. The room felt smaller. There's something else, Miss Hartwell said. Of course there was. In the past 11 months, there have been attempts to access this trust. My stomach dropped. By whom? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid another document forward. The name was printed clearly. Grant Quinn. My father. The air left my lungs in one quiet exhale. He submitted power of attorney documentation, she continued, claiming your grandmother was no longer mentally competent to manage her financial affairs. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears yet, but something sharper. That's not true, I said. She was sharp. She remembered every birthday in the family. She knew how to use FaceTime better than I do. Miss Hartwell nodded once. Your grandmother came into this branch personally on August 22nd of last year. Alone. She provided updated medical documentation confirming her mental capacity. She revoked any implied authority and formally barred Mr. Quinn from access. She also reconfirmed the trust beneficiary. The word beneficiary rang in my ears. Who? I asked, even though I already felt the answer pressing against my ribs. Miss Hartwell held my gaze. You. The simplicity of it hit harder than the number. Not split between siblings, not to be divided, not conditional, just me. My grandmother had known. She had anticipated my father's move before he made it. She had taken the bus because she didn't drive downtown anymore, sat in this office and protected something. Protected me. Miss Hartwell leaned forward slightly. You need legal counsel before this information circulates, she said firmly. Your father has already demonstrated intent. Now that the trust will transfer to you, he may attempt negotiation or contest. Negotiation. The word tasted bitter. I looked back down at the number on the page. It didn't feel like money. It felt like proof. Proof that my grandmother had seen everything. Proof that she had planned quietly while everyone else underestimated her. Proof that the book my father had thrown onto her grave was never pointless. It was a door, and I had just stepped through it. I don't remember leaving the bank. I remember the cold air hitting my face. I remember sitting in my Subaru with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing while downtown Cleveland moved around me like I wasn't part of it. A bus hissed to a stop across the street. Someone laughed. A delivery truck double parked. The world continued in ordinary rhythm. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my grandmother had just shifted. $2.7 million. The number didn't feel like wealth. It felt like time. Like every early morning she clocked in at the plant, every coupon clipped, every coat she wore one winter too long, every small sacrifice she never complained about. And my father had tried to take it. That part settled differently. He hadn't known about me being the beneficiary. He must have assumed he was. Of course he did. He's her only son. That's how he sees inheritance. Automatic. Generational entitlement dressed up as family legacy. But Grandma Dorothy had gone to the bank alone. She had revoked him. She had named me. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt protective, like she'd reached forward from months before her death and placed a shield in my hands. That afternoon, I called one of the attorneys Miss Hartwell had recommended, Dahlia Monroe. Her office was above a tire shop near West 65th. The hallway smelled faintly of rubber and stale coffee. The carpet had seen better decades. It wasn't impressive, which somehow made me trust it more. Dahlia herself was in her early 50s, practical haircut, no-nonsense posture, glasses that she peered over instead of through. She didn't smile when I told her the amount. She didn't widen her eyes or whistle or say anything dramatic. She just nodded. "Bring me everything," she said. I laid the deposit book on her desk. The note. The printed balance summary from the bank. The documents showing my father's attempted access. The revocation my grandmother had filed. Dahlia read in silence for a long time. She asked precise questions. Dates. Timing. Who else knew? Whether I had told anyone yet. No, I said. No one. Good, she replied without looking up. When she finally leaned back in her chair, she folded her hands and looked at me carefully. Your grandmother didn't just invest money, she said. She built a structure. The trust bypasses probate. That means it doesn't go through the estate your father will try to control. It transfers directly to you upon death. So he can't touch it? I asked. He can try, she said calmly. Anyone can try. But the documentation works against him. He submitted power of attorney paperwork claiming incapacity. She came in personally to revoke him. That's strong evidence of competence, I swallowed. He's going to say I manipulated her. Let him, Dahlia replied. He'd have to explain why she acted independently at the bank, why she updated the trust months before her death, why she specifically barred him. Courts do not look kindly on children who attempt to override elderly parents' documented decisions. The word override hit something in me. My father had overridden her in life, corrected her stories, minimized her work, edited her history into something more convenient, but he hadn't overridden her here. Dahlia slid the deposit book back toward me. You need to prepare for a conversation, she said. When he finds out the funds were transferred, he'll call you. He will not call calmly. I ran my fingers over the worn cloth cover. I'm not afraid of him, I said quietly. That wasn't entirely true. I was afraid of the confrontation, of the emotional manipulation, of the guilt. But I wasn't afraid of the truth. For the first time in my life, I had something my father couldn't talk over. My grandmother had noticed things, and she had left me more than money. She had left me leverage. The call came 3 days later. I knew it would. Dahlia had warned me, and once you know something is coming, every vibration of your phone feels like the start of a storm. It was late afternoon. I was still at work, staring at a spreadsheet full of shipping discrepancies I couldn't focus on. When my phone lit up with Dad, my pulse kicked hard once against my ribs. I let it ring twice before answering. Mara, he said, and his voice was warm, almost cheerful, the kind of warmth he uses with clients. Controlled, intentional. Hi, I replied. I've been meaning to call, he continued smoothly. There's been a bit of confusion regarding your grandmother's accounts. The bank sent some paperwork about a trust being closed and funds transferred. I'm assuming that's some kind of clerical mistake. Not what happened. Not, is this true? A mistake. I stared at my computer screen and said nothing. Well, he prompted. It wasn't a mistake. I said evenly. There was a pause on the other end, a short inhale. So you're aware of this? He asked carefully. Yes. Another pause. The warmth thinned slightly. Mara, I've been handling your grandmother's estate. As next of kin, that responsibility falls to me. If there was a trust, I would have known. She knew you didn't, I said before I could stop myself. Silence, then a softer tone, almost wounded. I was trying to protect her, he said. You know how confused she'd been getting. I submitted power of attorney paperwork because someone had to step in. She was vulnerable. My jaw tightened. She went to the bank herself, I said. She revoked you in person. The line went very quiet. You've been speaking to the bank? He asked. Yes. And what exactly did they tell you? That the trust transferred to the sole beneficiary. He exhaled slowly, measured. And who is that? He asked, though I could hear the answer pressing behind the question. Me. The word felt heavier than I expected. The warmth disappeared entirely. That doesn't make sense, he said sharply. I'm her son. I know, she wouldn't exclude me. She didn't exclude you, I replied. She protected something. His voice hardened. From what? From you. The silence this time wasn't brief. It was thick. You don't understand how these things work, he said finally, the old condescension slipping back into place. Trusts can be manipulated. Elderly people are influenced. If someone suggested... No one suggested anything, I cut in. My hands were shaking under my desk, but my voice stayed steady. She updated the trust in August. 4 months before she died. She brought documentation. She barred you. You're repeating what the bank told you, he snapped. You have no idea what was going on behind the scenes. I know she didn't trust you, I said quietly. That did it. His breath came faster now, less controlled. You're gonna tear this family apart over money? He demanded. I didn't create the trust, I said. She did. You think you earned that? He shot back. For bringing pastries on Saturdays? The words landed, but not the way he intended. Yes, I said softly. Actually, I think that mattered. He scoffed. You have no idea what I sacrificed for this family. I almost laughed at the irony. He had sacrificed nothing for her. She left instructions, I said, and I'm following them. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was calculation. This isn't over, he said finally. I believed him. But as I ended the call, I realized something else too. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for him. I was ready. The dinner invitation came the next morning. Not a text, not an email, a call. This time it was Celeste. Her voice trembled slightly, the way people sound when they're trying very hard to seem reasonable. Mara, sweetheart, she began, a term she had never once used for me before. Your father and I think it would be best if we all sat down together. As a family. There's clearly been some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That sounds productive, I said neutrally. Good. She replied quickly. Saturday evening, 6:30. We'll have Evan and Lila over too. We just want to talk this through calmly. Calm. I called Dahlia immediately after. Go, she said without hesitation. Listen, do not agree to anything. Do not sign anything. And if they offer you a number, remember that negotiation only exists when both sides have leverage. I have leverage, I said. You have documentation, she corrected gently. That's better. Saturday evening, I pulled into my father's driveway and parked behind the Audi. The house looked exactly as it always had. Perfect lawn lines, symmetrical planters, porch light glowing softly like it was welcoming someone home. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary and lemon polish. Grandma's china was on the table. I recognized it instantly, the blue-rimmed plates she'd used on holidays. The same set Celeste had once called dated. They'd taken it from the duplex already. Of course they had. Dinner started with small talk. Evan asked about my job with exaggerated interest. Lila complimented my sweater. Celeste refilled my water before I could ask. It felt like stepping into a play halfway through the second act. Then Dad cleared his throat. Mara, he began, folding his napkin deliberately, we've had some time to review the situation. Situation. There was a trust, he continued. We weren't aware of it. That was surprising. We? I asked quietly. He ignored that. Now, regardless of how it was structured, we're family. Your grandmother would never have wanted division. I waited. He leaned back slightly as if presenting something generous. You keep $600,000, he said. More than enough for someone in your position. We divide the rest equally. That way no one feels excluded. Someone in my position. I set my fork down. That's your offer? I asked. It's fair, Celeste added quickly. You'd still be incredibly comfortable. Incredibly comfortable. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder. Dad's eyes flicked to it. Before anyone could speak again, I laid the first document on the table, the denied power of attorney submission. Then the second, the record of Grandma's in-person revocation. The room shifted. Evan stopped chewing. Celeste's smile froze. Dad didn't touch the papers. She wasn't confused, I said calmly. She came to the bank alone. She brought documentation. She barred you specifically. I was protecting her, he snapped. From what? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I slid the final page forward. The beneficiary confirmation. Sole beneficiary, Mara Quinn. No ambiguity. No shared percentages. Just my name. You think this is about money, I said. It's not. She saw what you were trying to do. She documented it. She planned accordingly. His jaw tightened. She was influenced, he insisted. By whom? I asked. Silence. You? He tried. I shook my head slowly. She invested for decades before I was even born. The truth settled over the table like dust. She didn't leave me money, I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. She left me protection. Celeste's composure cracked first. You're going to destroy this family over pride? No, I said. I'm honoring her decision. Dad pushed his chair back abruptly. This isn't finished, he said. I believed him, but as I gathered my folder and stood, I realized something important. They had expected negotiation. They had expected guilt. They had expected me to fold. Instead, I had shown them something they couldn't argue with. Proof. And for the first time, I walked out of that house without feeling smaller than I was when I walked in. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unraveled. At first, it was phone calls, missed ones, then voicemails that started angry and ended pleading. My father left messages about family unity, about how money changes people. Celeste sent long texts about forgiveness and compromise, about how my grandmother would be heartbroken if she saw us like this. Evan tried a different angle, cool, rational, almost bored. Look, he said one afternoon, you won. Fine. But be smart. You don't need all of it. Think long term. Long term. As if my grandmother hadn't already done that. Dahlia filed the necessary paperwork immediately to secure the trust transfer. She also advised something I hadn't expected. A formal complaint documenting attempted financial exploitation. Not because I wanted revenge, because if my father attempted to challenge the trust in court by claiming Grandma was incompetent, we needed a paper trail that showed the opposite. The investigation was quiet, methodical, and deeply uncomfortable. Bank records were reviewed. His submitted power of attorney documents were scrutinized. The dates lined up too cleanly. His attempt in early summer, her revocation in late August. The timeline told a story without anyone needing to embellish it. He hired an attorney, a good one. Expensive. The word misunderstanding disappeared from his vocabulary and was replaced with procedural confusion. But confusion doesn't usually involve trying to override someone's legal autonomy. By June, the legal bills had started to pile up for him. I didn't hear this from him directly. I heard it from Evan, who called one evening sounding less confident than usual. He's stressed, Evan said. This is getting out of hand. It was out of hand when he filed those papers, I replied. There was a long pause. You could still settle, he said quietly. I thought about that. I thought about my grandmother taking the bus downtown at 80 years old. I thought about her sitting in that bank office, explaining calmly that she was competent. I thought about her choosing me, not out of favoritism, but out of clarity. No, I said. The case never made it to a dramatic courtroom showdown. The evidence was too straightforward. The bank's documentation was precise. Her signature updates were recent. The revocation was explicit. He accepted a plea agreement for attempted financial exploitation. Probation, fines, a permanent mark on his record. When the conviction became public record, the consequences spread quietly through his professional life. The flooring company that prided itself on integrity in business partnerships conducted a background review. Within weeks, he was let go. Officially, it was restructuring. Unofficially, no one wants a sales manager with a financial crime attached to his name. Celeste filed for divorce by late summer. Irreconcilable differences. The house went on the market in October. The Audi disappeared from the driveway not long after. Evan stopped calling altogether. In November, the trust officially transferred. After legal fees and taxes, the number in my new account still felt surreal. I met with a fiduciary advisor Dahlia recommended. We set up diversified investments, conservative growth strategies, long-term protections. I didn't quit my job. Not immediately. I did, however, pay off my student loans in full. I donated quietly to the Steelworkers Retirement Assistance Fund in my grandmother's name. And in December, I moved into a small house on a tree-lined street in Lakewood. Nothing flashy, just space. A backyard. A kitchen big enough for a proper table. The deposit book sits in my desk drawer now, not as a reminder of money, as a reminder of what she saw. The day I moved in, I visited her grave again. The wind off the lake was sharp, but not as cruel as it had been in February. I stood there and said out loud what I hadn't said before. You weren't simple, I told her. You were strategic. The dirt had long since settled. The book had not rotted, and neither had the truth. In the end, the only thing that crumbled was the illusion my father had built about himself. What she left me wasn't just wealth, it was clarity. Life has a funny way of revealing who shows up for you when nothing shiny is involved. The real wealth in this world isn't just money, it's consistency, quiet discipline, and paying attention when others don't. Protect your future. Document everything. Don't underestimate the quiet ones. And never assume someone's simple just because they don't brag. Also, if this story taught you anything, let it be this. Patience compounds better than revenge. But Revenge Protocol tells the stories better than anyone. So go ahead, subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment. I read them all, even the dramatic ones. Especially the dramatic ones.